36 hours for you to download and share with participants who are unable to join. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Douglas Reeves. Dr. Reeves is the founder of Creative Leadership Solutions. He's the author of more than 40 books and 100 articles on education, leadership, and student achievement. Doug and the Creative Leadership team are providing free webinars for teachers, leaders, parents, and students around the world. Doug.
Thank you so much, Tony, and greetings, everybody. I'm so honored to introduce Alexandra Guilamo. She's an internationally recognized authority on dual language instruction, and she helps to create an equitable environment for all students of every linguistic background. And she's also just a wonderful person. I've really enjoyed getting to know her as a colleague and as a friend. She has a great new book out that I want you to go get. She is the author of Coaching Teachers in Bilingual and Dual Language Classrooms, published by Solution Tree just this year. It's a really great resource, and it's a sort of thing that I want you to consider not only for your EL teachers, but it's something that really helps all of us become better educators. So with no further ado, Alexandra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Doug. It's been an honor just sort of learning from you, working alongside you. And today we really are thinking about what is an equity framework to ensure that our multilingual learners do not get lost in the range of sort of pandemics that we have going on simultaneously. So we're going to start our time together with a quick poll.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we'd like to get your answer to a question. So we ask that you take your cell phone out. If you'd like to respond to our poll by text, you simply need to compose a text to recipient 22333, 22s and 33s, and send the message Creative Lead 764. You should receive a response indicating that you have joined our poll. Or if you would like to respond by web browser, please type in the address that you see on the right-hand side there, which is pollev.com/creative lead 764. So we'll give you just a moment to do that and then display the question. So again, send a text following the directions on the left or join by browser using the directions on the right. And Alexandra, here is the question if you would like to pose that.
I do. So the first question is there a difference between equity and equality? So I know it says excellence. I apologize for that.
My typo, I will correct that.
The difference is between equity and equality. So if you think, yes, there is a difference, please enter A. If you think, no, these two terms, these two concepts are essentially the same thing, please answer B for no. We'll give everybody just a moment. Okay. And as more people respond, we're seeing that there's a little bit more of a balance, at least starting. Okay. Tony, do we have about all of the responses or as many as we're gonna?
Yes, ma'am. I think we are in good shape.
Perfect. So we have about 92% of the people on today's sort of webinar that really think that these two concepts are distinct. So here's the distinction that I see, because I do see these terms as quintessentially different. The first one is equality, okay? And this term, this concept to me really does imply or have an implication and connotation of being equal in parts, that we're distributing the same degree, the same amount, the same character across as evenly as possible. So if I have 6 kids, I'm trying to divide up the pizza as evenly across all 6 of them as I can, okay? But there's a difference in equity. Equity really gets at something much deeper than giving everybody the same equal parts. It's the idea that there are policies and practices that are specifically designed to ensure that everybody has equal access. not just to resources, which is one of the most common ways that we sort of talk about this issue of equity, but also accountability systems, environments and conditions for learning, the overall educational experience necessary to provide meaningful and deep learning experiences that help students to be independent throughout our lives or throughout their lives. Okay? The challenge is that many of us believe that in order to achieve equity, we must distribute things equally. And the reality is that equity does not demand, does not require, and it doesn't even request equality. Because by our very nature, and I include myself in that, multilingual students and their families are not the same. We are different. And so to offer us the same in quantity, quality, characteristics as those that are offered to monolingual learners and their families, by its very nature, creates a system that is less equitous. I want to pause right there and see if there's any questions. There's that difference in distinguishing between equity and equality tends to garner sometimes a few eyebrows.
Alexandra, this is Doug. I've got a question, and that is, what does that mean as a practical matter for things like scheduling, in terms of how I allocate teaching resources and allocate time during the school day?
So that is an absolutely brilliant question, particularly as we think about schools reopening in the fall, post-COVID-19 with limited resources, social distancing sort of provisions and contingency planning. We will get into that in just a bit, but the reality is that the implications of that are already supposedly built into everybody's ESSA plans, because there was supposed to be a metric and specific language around how schools do exactly that. The challenge is that many states and many districts, the language is so jargonful, to be politically correct, that it's very easy to leave no action and inaction to the interpretation. Okay. Tony, I know that you're also looking at questions. Are there any other questions that we
Just a few at this point regarding handouts. So again, ladies and gentlemen, I will post the handout periodically into the chat, so bear with me one moment. And my email is also in the chat. I will provide that for those that are unable to download. So
awesome. So let's go ahead and move forward. So a lot of us, you know, really think about equity or things not being like equity minded. It's either is or isn't equitous, if you will. It either is or isn't biased, racist, linguicist, right? But I'm going to be honest with you, that's not black and white. It's not that cut and dry. There are shades of what it looks like to be an anti-bias equity leader that starts their leadership and their sort of educational journey with students from a point of critical consciousness. When I say critical consciousness, I mean that we are questioning what it is that we believe, where those beliefs come from, and who those beliefs serve. We do so because our success as people, as teachers, as educators, as schools, are tied to the success of those that we serve. And that's our students and our communities. So if we think about us being in varying places, even in different points of our lives, there are times that I was more in the red than in the green. I try to be more in the green than in the red, right? But as we think about this being a continuum, all the way to the left of the continuum, what we have is an absence of policies that allow or prevent the use of violence, threats, or fear. So some examples of this that are most egregious to our multilingual families and communities is the back to school ICE raids that happened in Iowa. And I mean, reality is have been happening across the country for quite some time, and that sort of have crossed boundaries with the school, where we have kids that are in fear because they know that, you know, ICE came last night, or there's rumors of this or that or the other. Those are pieces that don't necessarily have to do with the school. And yet, I wonder how well we would be able to focus on a math lesson if we were worried about where our parents were going to be when we got home, or worried that we are now of age and we're undocumented, and we worry that they are going to come for us. When our primary concern is our safety, it makes being fully present in learning and the ability to engage in rigorous learning very difficult. On the very opposite of the continuum, we have the opposite of that, right? And it's not that we're neutral, because there is no such thing as neutrality. We either have policies, practices, and systems in place to protect students and schools from violence, threat, or fear, or we don't. And in essence, that is a policy that protects those who could potentially create violence, threats, or fear to students that come from multilingual backgrounds. There is no, I don't want to get involved, and staying neutral in these types of situations for your students, because your students do not have the opportunity to stop being Black when they walk into the building. They do not have the ability to stop being Muslim, to stop being gay or transgendered. And so if we lack policies that prevent such violences and fear in our students, then we are towards the left, and that is a choice that we have. Okay? Let's move forward, Tony. Now, many people sort of ask me to further elaborate, you know, like, Alexandra, ICE isn't in all of our communities. What does this look like on a day-to-day basis? So I've worked with schools all across the country, worked with educators and school systems internationally. And frankly, there's a lot of things that we have become numb to that are very much on the left side of the continuum in the red. Things like arresting primary school children for having tantrums, prohibiting braids. I've seen a number of cases in the last 10 years where there have been policies that ask students with more textured hair to remove braids, dreads, other ethnic hairstyles, hair coverings for our families and students who cover their hair and face around religious reasons, and calling students names and or cursing at them. While we don't necessarily see all of these events in all schools across the country, the idea isn't that it's this specific instance, rather that it is acts that take place, there are acts that take place in the school that create an environment and a culture of fear for some students based on things that are beyond their control. We don't have to just do that, but there's things like, maybe we'll celebrate and do an international night to celebrate your culture, but after the real learning time is over, or maybe for just 1 month. Or maybe it's that we communicate, listen, I don't see color, I don't see religion, I don't see, you know, your gender identification, I only see kids. That is better than creating fear, but it's still not acknowledging my identity, your student's identity, and how that impacts the way they learn, what their needs are, and their experience in this country. On the far right, really the goal is that schools question their policies, that they have a team in place, a cadence of data that they review in order to hold themselves accountable and to ensure diversity of perspectives in the decision-making process and the strategies and conditions needed to ensure that everybody is succeeding while on their watch. Now, I say diversity of perspective, not just celebrating diversity, because oftentimes the books that we talk about, the lessons, the heroes, the things that are surface level, schools are very willing to begin making those changes, right? We have to teach characters, right? What is a character? Why are they important? What are character traits? It's our choice what characters that we elevate in our classrooms. We have to teach history, right? We can choose to teach the history of different perspectives, particularly around things like Columbus Day, Thanksgiving, et cetera, et cetera. Those are choices. But schools aren't always as apt and willing to diversify the voices at the table making the decisions. And that is the only way to truly achieve equity and to mitigate the biases that we all have. There isn't a single one of us that is immune from biases. It's our brain's way of filtering and categorizing things, of making us in many ways feel safe, feel like we have order. But when we surround ourselves at the decision-making table with people that hold the same biases, we are bound to get answers and policies and strategies that really only meet our own personal needs and speak to our privilege. In order to change that narrative and to truly be critically conscious, our job is to say, who are those voices? What are those perspectives that are closest to the challenge, the problem, or the issue? And those are the voices that we must elevate at the decision-making table. And we must create processes to ensure that their voice isn't lost and tokenized.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to know where you believe your organization is. So if you'll remember these 4 levels from the far left, arresting primary students, to the far right of schools that question their policies. We'd like you to take that cell phone out. If you joined the last poll, you're good to go. Your next response will be up in just a moment. But those that joined our webinar since the prior poll, if you'd like to participate by text, please compose a text to recipient 22333. That's 2 2s and 3 3s, and send a message creative lead 764. If you would like to use a web browser, please navigate to pollev.com/creative lead 764. And we would like to know, ladies and gentlemen, is where is your school on the continuum of critical consciousness? Again, far left, arresting primary children, prohibiting dreadlocks, policing language. Far right, questioning your policies and holding yourselves accountable.
So again, A is that we have no policies to protect kids from being fearful around violence, emotional, physical, psychological, because of the language that they bring, their sexuality, their gender identification, their religion. And all the way towards the end, we have schools that actively question, challenge the policies. Who benefits from these policies? Are there gaps?
And we'll give you about 20 seconds more to respond.
Okay.
Pretty even split.
We do have a pretty even split. I'm really shocked. So we have about 37% 7% that say we're still towards the left side of the continuum, where we are not explicitly creating policies and ensuring that we are protecting our students so that they can come to our schools and our families can come to our schools unfearful that they will be ridiculed or that harm will come to them either from other students or from adults in the building because of who they are, things that they absolutely cannot control. I'll tell everybody just a quick story. My father is one of the most brilliant people that I know. He is most comfortable in Spanish, and to this day he still speaks with a pretty strong accent that I absolutely love. He was a former pilot in the Air Force, and so he loved flying jets. To this day, he still sits with my children and watches jets fly, and he tells them all about what model it is. My father went to school twice that I can ever remember because it just wasn't a place that he felt welcome. Once was when he had to sort of defend me against a teacher that refused to believe that I had been hurt and that I wasn't lying. And a second time to ensure that my younger sister never was subjected to that teacher again. Those were the only 2 times that I can ever remember my father being in a building, because he knew it. And nobody had to tell him that he wasn't welcome or that they would judge his language, his accent. It was understood, okay? I want us to think about this because this has everything to do with why we need to think about making shifts that get us towards equity, because some of us have to worry about that and some families simply don't. And so equality simply won't do. Let's move forward, Tony.
Alexandra, let me just ask one quick question with respect to questioning policies. I think sometimes in education we tend to be very literal. And so could you share with us an example of a policy that this is the way we used to do it, and now, having recognized how we can improve, this is the way we do it now?
So that's a really brilliant question. There are huge policy implications right now, particularly for our language learners. We have a number of states that, despite having a range of evidence and research around how bilingual education is a much superior model to pulling students out and giving them 30, 60 minutes of English only instruction that's disconnected from the rest of their school day, or doing sort of a sink or swim, which is what many states were doing for quite some time. We just now, since 2018, we've had 3 states that have just made it legal to implement a bilingual education or a dual language educational program, which is an absolute travesty that we have, in some cases, schools that go above and beyond, and we have, everything that kids should have: active science labs and STEM labs and robotics clubs and AP and a robust after school clubs and sports, sort of suite of options for students. But the one educational approach that has been proven to be superior to all others, we, until recently, have made it illegal in a number of states. And so we're trying to undo that, but the consequences are absolutely drastic. There's no amount of sheltered instruction or sort of sink or swim English instruction that can force a kid who does not speak English to learn content. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome. I will tell you the one that I see most often, and a lot of people really do it from a place of thinking they're being helpful, is to say, listen, while you're in class, we want you to speak English only. Nope, stop speaking whatever their native language is or language of comfort and socialization. And so what happens is that we silence students. We already remove one of their greatest assets and tools to bring into the classroom, and it creates sort of a push and pull of power dynamics between the child, who language is part of their identity, of who they are. And the teacher has effectively, or the principal or the security in the hallway has effectively said, you will shut that part of who you are off, or else you do not belong here. And so we have a lot of misinformation that has gone out that says, listen, forcing students into one language, into English, is the best way to help them. And we have decades of research worldwide around the globe that just says the exact opposite. And that's one of the reasons why accountability is really important. And we do program evaluations with all the schools that we support. And so it's amazing to see our multilingual students actually outperforming their non-multilingual peers in other classrooms in the gen ed setting. So I want to make sure that we sort of just turn the corner on these three sort of big buckets of ways that we can really move the needle right now for changing the dynamics for our multilingual kiddos, especially as we are planning for reopening school in the fall. Number one is equitable access to resources. Number two is equitable learning environments. And number three is an equitable accountability system, okay? We'll get into number one and number two. Number three, I've been trying to hold off on giving too much guidance or clarity around that piece, because right now this is a bigger conversation nationwide.
So, Alexandra, as we prepare to take a deeper look at an equitable learning environment, a comment has come in from Angelo. I feel that many ELL, ESL students are in a bubble where they are not exposed to current or relevant topics. We concentrate too much in their English skills that we sometimes forget about preparing them for social justice topics that are relevant to them once they leave school.
So that is such a powerful insight. I will tell you that that's one of the things that is a stipulation when I or anybody on my team sort of works with schools. Dual language and bilingual education were born from issues of equity and a need for greater social justice. Their outside realities, they don't get to check it when they walk in the doors of the school. And so allowing that to play a role in how they find meaning and value in education is absolutely critical. We call it, and it's in this slide actually, interestingly enough, we call it mirrors, windows, and doors. For us, a curriculum that serves language learners is really about not just giving them access to grade level content standards, which oftentimes is not even the case, but it also is a curriculum that provides mirrors for them where they can see themselves and they can relate to the characters, the topics, the themes, the issues, the struggles. The second piece is windows, where students have an opportunity to look through the window into a perspective that they might not have, that may be part of the limitations of their own experience or where they live geographically. And finally, the third one is doors. And this is something that we really felt strongly that we had to add to sort of the requisites of a curriculum for multilingual learners. And that is, how do we provide students with a doorway between what's learned in the classroom and its applicability, I think that's a word, to the real world in terms of how they make meaning, how they integrate this new learning in a way that makes sense beyond the walls of the school. The reality is that for our students, and this has long been a reality, doing well on a test is simply not good enough. That does not sort of offer the motivation that students need to engage in the rigorous learning that they need to. But engaging the social justice standards, which sort of follow this mirror, windows, doors, is absolutely the way to do it. And I will share that one of my Massachusetts districts, they officially have um, board approved a new report card for their dual language school or program that's now been adopted by the rest of the district, that includes the social justice standards as part of what they are holding students and teachers accountable for. I want to make sure that we know sort of the things that we have to give access to, even as we return from COVID and beyond, and the things that we really need to be critically conscious about, because often these come from personal beliefs rather than implementing an effective program for our students. The first is access to the full set of resources for personnel. Okay, we have a lot of times that teachers are told, listen, this is what we adopted for the district, you figure it out, you're the bilingual teacher. And that is not necessarily a process to be most effective for our kiddos. Access to evidence-based curricular materials designed for each program language that offer mirrors, windows, and doors to learning beyond the test. Okay. On the flip side of that, sometimes we hear that we believe instruction can be delivered in hallways, closets, stages, mobile units, because it's just pull-out services for 30 minutes. Those are not the conditions by which we should be asking our students, our teachers, to engage in learning. The second piece is believing that one size fits all curricular program will effectively serve diverse student demographics. This happens a lot in bilingual or dual language programs, where the only consideration for adopting a new curricular resource is, do they offer it in Spanish? Great, everybody's getting this program because that's what we are doing. And it discounts the differences that these students bring to the table that could be resources if they're allowed to tap into those skills, those treasures that they bring to the table as resources.
Alexandra, as we transition to the next slide, a question from Monica asking that you speak to the issue of a lack of Black and brown faculty and staff in many schools and the implications of that.
There is a huge issue of Black and brown staff. I will tell you that right now. I can tell you that I've been in school buildings where I was the only person of color, and I simply just got tired of justifying, yes, I am Black, yes, I am Latinx, yes, I am bilingual. You're gonna have to grapple with that in your own way. One of the things that I have shared with many of the schools with which we work is, number one, when you do hire and onboard new staff, whether it is teaching staff or any other staff, have an entry and exit process so that you can understand what were the issues that made them want to stay or the issues that made them want to leave. We have a lot of people that are guessing at the challenges of retaining Black and brown staff and bilingual staff. And until you talk to those people that are closest to the issue, we will never have effective and accurate information to really make decisions. The other piece is, particularly in the multilingual community, we have some policy issues around extra and additional certification requirements that people that are fully certified, fully educated could be amazing advocates and educators in the classroom, but we have to jump through many, many more hoops than our monolingual colleagues. And so advocating right there alongside us, questioning, why do those policies exist? Why? We can do everything else that a gen ed teacher can do, a gen ed or a monolingual leader can do, and yet we can do it across 2 languages. I think that is one of the things that we need help from outside of just the bilingual, multilingual community. Okay, thank you, Tony.
Alexandra, if I could just jump in quickly, I wrote an article about this that I'm going to post on the chat room, but the bottom line is money is important. Can't have 6-figure debt on a 5-figure income, but money is not enough. The fundamental reason we have such a shortfall, not only of Black and brown prospective teachers, but of all teachers, pipeline's down 35%, is cue Aretha Franklin, it's RESPECT. If people don't feel respected on their job, I don't care how much money we pay them, it's not going to happen. So I think we have to be wary of thinking that we can just tweak policy. There's a fundamental respect issue that we have to get to.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for adding that piece. I think the the other piece that we have to think about when we talk about learning environments, when we go in and work with schools, we always do an environmental audit, an environmental equity audit. And what we really are looking for are discrepancies between student demographics and what the building walls really have to say. What does the library look like? Who are we celebrating? What are the values that I can see audibly in the hallways, right? There are some people that say, we love our kids, we love our kids, we love our kids. And then I just stand at the end of the hallway during transition time and all I see is screaming at children to get to where they belong. And so those types of disconnects are things that we absolutely look for. Counseling services, it's also being able to make those connections with somebody and having people that can connect to your students. The other piece is on the belief side, those things that we really want to make sure that we are really critically conscious of. And that is believing that prohibiting students' use of certain languages or obedience to rules is a sign or indicator of a climate of order and conditions for learning. We have a lot of faulty metrics that we look at. And so I challenge everybody. Misconduct is something that we absolutely have to look at as an indicator for culture and climate, but it's not necessarily the most important one, okay? Access to text, there should be ongoing reviews of what texts are being brought into your building and how that matches the student demographics that you have in the languages that they need to have access to. If you have a parent library, the same audit and access to text must hold true as well. That also goes for any print materials that leave the office or the school. We cannot continue relying on our bilingual staff or multilingual staff to be translating everything. The schools must take on the responsibility of ensuring communication, print communication, and oral communications with our families in the language that they understand. And you know that you are moving towards the right side of the continuum when the sentiments in the building is we need to find solutions because we don't speak Urdu, we don't speak Somali, we don't speak Mandarin, we don't speak Spanish. It's not somebody get me a translator because they don't speak English, okay? The onus always falls on us to create those conditions that give our families access, right? And on the flip side, be critically conscious of the belief that simply by having a library, it's good enough. By having some technology, we got apps for everybody. Apps for everybody don't always work for everybody. And that having any counseling service or nursing service, fill in the blank, regardless of what languages they speak, whether they are willing to create a shared definition of respect, to value and respect the cultural norms of the students that they serve, that is not going to be impactful. Okay? I always challenge everybody. If the norms and beliefs we consider to be right are the only norms that matter, schools must be prepared to accept the consequence of threatening the rights of others. It's by its very definition, the definition of a hostile space for some, okay? There is no such thing as my way or the highway when it comes to a school that is intended for students, okay? Now, some of us have conscious or unconscious biases. Obviously, we know that when we see things on the left, like, hey, right, like when diversity wins, we all lose. Like, we don't want to see our teachers, our educators, our leaders posting things that are explicitly and consciously violent or threatening towards our students. But we also have to mitigate the unconscious biases that are easy to identify only for those people who are closest to the challenge. For the rest of us, it really is quite hard for us to identify some of those biases. Tony, if we can move forward. And this is where it gets a little bit trickier. And that's why I chose to go with equity of learning environment before equitable access, to educational resources. I want us to be critically conscious of the limitations of what we know, right? I want us to listen and be critically conscious with our hearts as we think about how we might need to reallocate educational resources for multilingual learners when we return in the fall and beyond, if we are truly going to say equity and show actions that prove equity, okay? Number one is that we have to provide our students and families with access to specialized language services, programs, activities, and information, all in the language that they best understand, okay? It's been very disappointing to see so many districts having lost track of so many kids and using language barriers as sort of the reason for it. Every school system knows the language of the home for all of our children, and if we don't, we are engaged in educational malpractice, hands down, okay? We must take the step to ensure that we know what's going on and that they have the information to know what's going on with school and how to be a partner. Because right now, and possibly in the fall, our homes, our students' homes, are their schools. And so whereas families sort of, we've taught them that they have to respect the rules of the school, educators now must also respect the rules of the home. And that might be different than what we expect. The second piece is that we must ensure access to evidence-based practices and strategies for the students that they serve. There are a lot of narratives right now around planning for the whole. This is what we are going to do for everyone. And we have already decided that we are going to reallocate the ESL bilingual teaching staff to minimize class size and social distancing for the entirety of the student population. I will tell you that that is unacceptable. That is the least equitous thing that we can do. Those services and that support are critical lifelines for your students. There's very little expectation that I have, and most people that navigate multiple languages have around academic and school success, if the lifelines that help them be successful have been removed and reallocated to those students who already have access to the educational experience. Because good instruction is simply not good enough for language learners, particularly in dual language and bilingual programs. Let's move forward, Tony. The second piece is access to necessary funds for equally effective approaches. It is not uncommon for schools to say, we are going to fund the district PD around literacy, a new literacy initiative through Title II, and that we are going to let the bilingual department use their little bit of Title III funds to have a few days. I want us to think critically about our beliefs, okay? Title III was intended to supplement, not supplant. And if we were making decisions for the whole, would we have the same approach? If not, then we know that we are moving towards the left side of the continuum. The other piece is that we need to make sure that our students have access to teachers who've received and value the collaboration and coaching needed to improve instructional effectiveness. I'm going to tell you that is the one reason why, that is the primary reason why I wrote the book. I got so tired and disheartened hearing the horror stories of the lack of support, the refusal to collaborate with our dual language and bilingual teachers and our ESL or ESOL staff. They have an additional set of skills and knowledge that every teacher can benefit from. But when teachers choose not to collaborate and we choose not to implement or enact policies that require that collaboration, and when we choose not to coach and provide supports to our dual language and bilingual teachers, because we don't speak the language of instruction, we diminish their effectiveness. And that's an adult problem. That's an equity problem. That is not sort of an issue that should be placed on the shoulders of students or teachers. Okay? Let's move
Alexandra,
forward.
we have a question for you, and that is, what's your opinion about a state suspending alternative methods of assessments? In Massachusetts, we call it the MCAS, but every state has got their own variation on that theme.
So I have mixed feelings about that. I want to be very candid. On one hand, we need to have transparency in terms of who is progressing, particularly at the school level, and who is not. On the other hand, I also know that those tests, particularly for language learners, only tell me something that I already know, which is that students are not yet proficient at grade level academic language. And so without having some type of consideration for that on some type of high stakes test, I don't see that they are valid and trustworthy measures of what they say they're actually measuring. Many of the districts that I work with, they've shifted to side-by-side rubrics where it is very clearly articulated how language, according to and matched to the proficiency level of students, and contents come together in a task that's been backwards designed from the standard. And the standards including language, as well as social justice. So I wanna make sure that we move to sort of the stop sign. There's two last slides that I wanna make sure that everybody has an opportunity to see. Perfect. So this is one. The critically conscious educator who is focused on being an equity leader and anti-bias educator is going to ask themselves this question with every decision that they make. Will this decision, or will the decision we make, further hurt the students that already lack full access to the educational resources they need to be successful? And will it benefit those that already have access? I want us to really think about this critically, because this is a conversation that's not happening, and this is where the opportunity gap continues to increase and the achievement gap continues to increase, because what we put into it is what we get out of it. And if we continue to put in resources and intentionality into monolingual approaches, our bilingual, multilingual, dual language students will continue to suffer the consequences of that very narrow and sort of siloed decision-making process. The last piece, Tony, that I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to share is the whole school equity framework. Oftentimes when people reach out, they reach out because it's one classroom or two classrooms or one building. And my response is always, listen, equity work, bilingualism, dual language education, it is daily, long-term equity work. And so if you're not willing to put in the time as a building to create a culture where every student, because it's not just dual language and bilingual education, it's not just Black Lives Matter. We have an alarming suicide rate amongst our LGBTQ community. We have students who are ridiculed and threatened and chased on the way home from our Muslim community. We have, this is beyond Black Lives Matter into intersections for all of our students who don't necessarily walk in the door with the same privileges as those adults that lead them. And so I want us to think of it as three phases: understanding why you are there. How is it that some of the things are happening, especially if our purpose is clear, and what it is that we need to do to return education to preparing students for a democracy so they have full access. There's full access to all people, okay? Tony, you were already going forward to my favorite quote by Paulo Freire.
Sorry about
But
that. Got trigger happy on the slide advance.
that's okay. Education is an act of love, and that's an act of courage. And I will tell you that you have dual language and bilingual and language learner advocates that have been out there taking hits, being courageous. But this has to be a shared injustice for all of us to be fighting to ensure equity, not just saying equity. 3 critical steps that we can take now, Tony. I don't know if it was before this or after this. I lose track. One is start with self-awareness and your own capacity building, okay? Have eyes wide open into the limitations of what you know and seek to learn some of those things from the perspective of those who are closest to the issue. Number 2 is diversify the process and the decisions, but you're gonna need to include perspectives that are different than your own. If you're looking around the table and it's the same sort of 7 people making the decisions, anticipate the fact that you're gonna get the same results and it's gonna come from the same perspective. And finally, hold your district, your schools, your educators, yourself accountable for actually making the shift to reallocating resources to ensure that all students have access to an opportunity at an education. That it's not gonna be a popular decision. I will tell you right now, you will have parents, you will have community members that say, hey, we want this, whatever it may be. And our job as educators is to say, I understand. And as soon as we ensure that everybody minimally has access to an education in place they can learn, we will continue to engage in equality so that we readjust our resources to reintroduce additional opportunities. All right. Here's our exit ticket.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to close with the final poll and then final comments from Doug and Alexandra. As a result of today's conversation, a 2-short conversation with Alexandra, we'd like to know what you would start as a result of today. So share one thing you'll be doing in your school context, or stop. And again, we'd like to ask you to do that using Poll Everywhere. So if you would, just insert the word start and the phrase of what you will begin, or stop and what you will stop and what you will begin. And those comments should start to pop up here on the screen. So again, start, tell us the action that you will take as a result of today, or stop, something that you'll stop doing in your buildings as a result of the day. And I'll turn it back to Doug and Alexandra for closing comments. You may respond up to 6 times.
Yep. Alexandra, my experience is that it's a lot easier to start things than to stop things. And so when people say, well, gee, Ms. Guilamo, we'd love to do this, but we don't have the time and we don't have the resources. What I find is that we all have the same amount of time, but a lot of it is being spent on futile activities like frantic coverage of every single standard rather than focusing on what I've called the power standards. And people say they don't have resources, and what we've learned is that an enormous amount of resources are spent on things that either teachers are not using or that do not influence student achievement. So part and parcel of investing in the right stuff that you're recommending is casting a critical eye on how we can save time and save resources. So I think there's some real opportunities for us to collaborate here where whenever somebody says we don't have time and money, we got to help them find time and money.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Doug. I will tell you absolutely. I have the same number of hours in a day, but this is a priority for me. It is my life. I have children in the school system who experience this personally, and so I don't have the luxury of saying I'm going to get licenses for this, even though I know those licenses, those apps, those programs don't do anything for our multilingual Black and brown babies. And so we just have to be really honest with ourselves. We all have a limited amount of resources, but we also all have a choice in terms of how we choose to spend those resources, what we choose to say no to, and what we choose to say yes to. And for me, it all boils down to, I will give of my privilege so that others can have access to some of the same privileges. It's as simple as that. I will be available for questions. Those of you that just want to shoot me an email. I know that Doug, you put your email on the next slide as well. Please reach out to us. This is not easy, right? But as long as you know your purpose as an educator, as a leader, as a school, and it's to serve your student demographic, it becomes easier to push back on those things that don't add to that, but only create more injustice.
I've been torn, Alexandra. Such great comments rolling in here. I want to advance to the contact information, but I want to leave these up for just a little bit more. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for those. This poll will remain open for the next couple of minutes, so if you have other ideas you'd like to contribute, please keep sending them in. And as Alexandra mentioned, here is both her and Doug's contact information on the screen.
Well, Alexandra, I just want to thank you so much for your insight and your passion. It certainly comes through, as well as the practical approach that you take. We are all struggling to find solutions, and they're not perfect, but we know that imperfect progress is better than fear to act, which leads to no action at all. So thanks for giving us courage and supporting us on this journey.
Thank you, Doug. And if you are not following us on Twitter just yet, you need to be following both of us. I post lots of feisty videos every week, just little blurbs and snippets of key pieces that sort of connect research to everyday life and the decisions that we're making. And sometimes it's just with districts that I'm serving. So it's kind of like free PD. If you're not following Doug and I, you should be.
Well, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of the day, and hope to dialogue with you more on an individual basis.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Please keep the conversation going. This webinar will be posted on creativeleadership.net within 36 hours, and we appreciate your questions and comments. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.